Everyone remembers the slap. But no one talks about what happened after. Because the slap hurt for a moment. But the silence destroyed her for years. No one stopped it. No one spoke. Everyone said it wasn't their place. This is not a story about violence. It's a story about everyone who did nothing. Before the wedding, before the applause, before the perfectly pressed suit, before the white dress hung like a promise no one planned to keep, there was a mother. She didn't exist in the glossy photos. No one said her name in polished rooms. But she was there in every year that made the groom possible. She lived in an old house on the edge of town in Nigeria, where mornings began with the rasp of a broom over dusty ground and nights ended under a weak yellow bulb that couldn't hide the peeling paint. The air always carried something: heat, smoke from a neighbor's cooking fire, the faint metallic smell of rain that might come or might not. It wasn't a life people bragged about. It was a life people survived. She wasn't rich, but she knew how to endure. She raised her son on simple meals and stubborn faith. On the nights he burned with fever, she stayed awake, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead and whispering prayers into the dark like they were medicine. On the days the rain came hard, she still went out wrapped in worn fabric, headscarf tied tight, because school fees didn't pause for weather, and a child's future doesn't wait for comfort. When her boy grew, the neighbors began to say it the way people do when they're half proud and half jealous. That one? He'll go far. He was smart. He was hungry. And more than anything, he wanted out. She understood. She never tried to chain him to the same soil that had swallowed her youth. She didn't call his ambition disrespectful. She didn't say, "Stay and suffer with me." Mothers like her didn't ask for company in pain. The day he told her he was leaving for the city, she only nodded. No tears, no dramatic pleas. She held her face steady, as if stillness itself could protect him. And she said one quiet thing that stayed in the room after he walked away. "Go, my son. Just remember the road home." In the years that followed, he did what people do when the city starts calling them sir. The calls became fewer. The messages grew shorter. The visits turned into something that needed a reason, an excuse, a holiday. The old house stayed. The mother stayed. Only his presence thinned out, like smoke. Sometimes she would catch herself holding the phone after a call ended, staring at the screen as if she could pull more of him out of those last few seconds. She would tell herself not to be needy. She would swallow her wanting the way she had swallowed hunger, fear, disappointment quietly, without making it anyone else's problem. Then one day, he called with a voice she almost didn't recognize. Bright, fast, polished at the edges. "I'm getting married," he said. Pride sat in his words like a new suit. Excitement, a confidence that sounded expensive. She listened without interrupting. She didn't rush her joy, because joy had always been something she handled carefully, like it could spill. There was a long pause on her end. Not because she wasn't happy, because happiness for her always carried a shadow. Where do I fit in this? When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle, almost shy. "My son, do you need me to help with anything?" On the other end, his silence came quickly too, 3 seconds that felt like a door quietly closing. Not because he didn't hear her, because he didn't know how to answer without revealing what he had already decided. When he spoke again, his tone was light, too light. "No, Mama, it's okay. I've got it." She nodded, even though he couldn't see. That nod was automatic, something her body had learned long ago. The nod of a woman who had spent her life being reasonable so others could be comfortable. In the days before the wedding, she began to prepare anyway. No one told her to. No invitation arrived with fancy letters. No planner called her name. But a mother doesn't wait to be asked to love. She folded her clothes slowly, smoothing each piece like it mattered. She took her oldest scarf, the one she used when mornings were cold and evenings felt lonely, and placed it on top. She packed as if she was packing dignity, not fabric. In her mind, she pictured it clearly. She would sit in a corner, quiet, unnoticed, just close enough to see her son's face when he said his vows. That would be enough. She didn't know that to some people, her presence wasn't just inconvenient. It was dangerous, because in certain circles, poverty isn't just a condition. It's an embarrassment. In the city, the wedding was being built like a show. Everything was perfect. A big venue. Bright lights. Music chosen to make people feel important. Guests who didn't come for love, but for proximity, who knew how to smile with their teeth while calculating with their eyes. There were handshakes that lasted too long. Laughter that sounded practiced. Men in crisp outfits, women in glittering fabrics, perfumes expensive enough to announce status before a word was spoken. People talked about the groom's career, his future, his new connections. No one asked about his mother. And he didn't mention her, not because he hated her, not because he carried some loud, violent resentment, but because sometimes silence is easier than explanation. Because saying, "This is my mother," would invite questions. Questions would invite judgment. Judgment would invite shame. And shame is the one thing a man will do almost anything to avoid, especially in front of people he wants to impress. So he kept her off his tongue. He kept her out of the story. The night before the wedding, back in her old house, she sat alone. She checked her outfit again, as if she might find a mistake that could be fixed with enough careful hands. She pressed out small wrinkles and imagined, briefly, that she could press out loneliness the same way. Then she sat down. The room was quiet in that particular Nigerian way where you can still hear the world outside. A motorcycle passing. A distant laugh. A dog barking at something unseen. And through it all, the soft hum of her own breathing. She wasn't anxious. She wasn't afraid. She just felt something familiar settling into her bones. Like dust, the feeling of being placed on the outside, but still expected to wait. Because that's what she had always done. Wait, hope, endure, smile when needed. She didn't know that tomorrow. That silence would grow teeth. She didn't know that tomorrow. The silence would become something much bigger. No one spoke. The sound of the slap didn't echo. It didn't need to. It landed once clean, sharp, and then disappeared into the space between people who suddenly forgot how to breathe. For a fraction of a second, the room froze. Not because they were shocked, but because they were waiting. Waiting to see who would react first, not waiting to see if someone else would take responsibility, not waiting for permission to feel something. It never came. A woman in a gold gel blinked too slowly and looked down at her phone, as if a message had just arrived that required her full attention. A man near the aisle adjusted his cufflinks, tugging at them with unnecessary force, his jaw tight, eyes fixed anywhere but forward. Someone near the back let out a small, awkward laugh, thin and misplaced, then swallowed it when no one joined. The mother stood there, her face still, not because she felt nothing, but because she had learned long ago that reacting only gave people something else to judge. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, she waited. Across the room, the groom didn't move either. His shoulders were tense, his posture rigid, as if stillness might undo what had just happened. He stared ahead, not at her, not at anyone, his eyes locked on a point that didn't exist. He told himself it would pass. He told himself this wasn't the moment. Not here, not today. Someone cleared their throat. Another guest shifted in their seat. And then, almost mercifully, the master of ceremonies stepped forward. He smiled. Not a cruel smile. Not a mocking one. Just a professional smile, the kind that knows how to smooth over problems without ever naming them. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady, amplified just enough to feel authoritative, "let us continue. No pause. No acknowledgement. No space for what had just happened to exist. The band picked up the cue instantly. Music filled the room again, bright, celebratory, too loud for what the moment required. Drums kicked in. A keyboard followed. The rhythm pushed forward, insisting that joy resume on schedule. People obeyed. Chairs scraped softly as guests adjusted themselves back into comfort. Conversations restarted in low murmurs. Glasses were lifted again. Someone clapped, then stopped, then clapped again when another person joined. The wedding marched on. The mother was still standing. No one asked if she was all right. No one offered her a seat. No one even asked her name. Eyes slid past her, over her, around her, never landing long enough to turn into concern. Some faces showed discomfort. Others showed relief. A few showed irritation, as if her presence now complicated an event they wanted to enjoy. A woman nearby leaned toward her husband and whispered something too soft to hear. He nodded once, sharply, as if agreeing to forget. Someone else murmured, "Let it go," under their breath. Not to the room. Not to the situation. To themselves. Because letting it go was easier than stepping in. The bride stood at the center of it all, her smile carefully reassembled. Her hands trembled slightly, then stilled as she clasped them together. She did not look at the mother. She did not look at anyone. She looked forward. It was not cruelty. It was calculation. Across the room, an aunt shook her head slowly, lips pressed tight, as if to say this is unfortunate, but she didn't move. A cousin glanced toward the door, then back to his drink. Another guest straightened her dress and focused on the cake, already planning which slice she wanted. The music grew louder. Laughter followed. The room filled again, not with relief, but with performance. The mother finally moved. Not forward, not away. She simply stepped to the side. She found an empty space near the wall, where she would be less visible, where her presence would cause the least disruption. She stood there, hands folded, eyes lowered, breathing shallow. No one told her to move. She understood the signal anyway. The celebration wrapped itself tightly around the moment, burying it under sound and color and motion. What had happened became something impolite to acknowledge. Something heavy that would ruin the mood if named. And so it wasn't named. Silence settled, not loud. Not dramatic, but thick, sticky. The kind that clings to skin and makes people uncomfortable without knowing why. It looked like peace. Everyone was seated. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was behaving. From the outside, it worked. From the inside, something was rotting. The mother stood there as the ceremony continued, the music swelling and dipping, the vows beginning as if nothing had interrupted the flow. Words about love and respect floated through the air, detached from the reality they were meant to describe. She listened, not to the vows, to the absence. She felt it in the way people avoided her eyes, in the way conversations bent around her, in the way the room had decided, collectively, that the safest thing to do was nothing. No one pushed her again. They didn't need to. Silence did the rest. And silence, she knew, always sounds like peace when you're not the one being hurt. After the wedding, life didn't explode. It didn't collapse either. It simply continued. That was the strange part. There was no apology, not that night. Not the next morning, not in the days that followed. No phone call that began with, "I'm sorry." No message asking, "Are you okay?" No awkward visit framed as concern. Nothing. The moment was treated like something fragile, not because it mattered, but because touching it might break the illusion that everything was fine. The groom returned to the city with his new wife. Their photos appeared online almost immediately. Smiles, bright lights, carefully chosen angles. People commented with heart emojis and congratulations. No one asked who wasn't smiling. No one noticed who was missing from the frame. Back in the old house, the mother woke up the next morning the way she always had, early. She swept the floor slowly, the broom dragging dust into thin lines that disappeared as quickly as they formed. She boiled water. She sat down to eat alone. The food tasted the same. But the room felt quieter. She waited for her phone to ring. It didn't. At first, she told herself it was normal. They were newly married, busy, happy. She told herself not to interrupt. That was always her instinct, to make herself small enough to fit around other people's lives. Days passed, then weeks. The silence didn't announce itself, that it arrived gently. Like a habit, she tried once. She dialed his number one afternoon, her fingers hovering just long enough to feel foolish before pressing call. The phone rang, once, twice, then stopped. No answer. She stared at the screen, waiting for it to light up again, waiting for a return call that would explain everything. It didn't come. At the next family gathering, small, informal people greeted her politely, warmly, even. There were smiles, hugs, comments about the weather and the food. No one mentioned the wedding. No one mentioned what happened there. It was as if the moment had been carefully folded away and placed somewhere unreachable. She listened to conversations move around her like water around a stone. Someone talked about work. Someone laughed about traffic in the city. Someone asked about the bride's family. No one asked her how she was. When she spoke, the room didn't stop. Not rudely, just indifferently. Her words slid into the air and vanished. At meals, the silence grew heavier. She sat at the table while others ate and talked around her. Plates clinked. Spoons scraped. Laughter came in short bursts. She chewed slowly, carefully, so no one would have to wait for her. She learned which questions to avoid. She stopped asking about her son. She stopped mentioning his name. Silence trained her quickly. Another day. Another unanswered call. Another evening with the television on, not to watch, but to fill the space where voices should have been. In the city, her son told himself a story. He told himself that not bringing it up was the mature thing to do. That revisiting the moment would only create drama. That time would smooth it over. He told himself silence was mercy. When his wife asked once, "Have you talked to your mother?" he shrugged and said, "She's fine." He didn't know. He didn't ask, and no one challenged him. At home, the mother began to adjust. She stopped setting an extra plate. She stopped checking her phone every few minutes. She started sleeping earlier, not because she was tired, but because night gave her fewer chances to hope. Family members continued to visit. They brought food. They brought news. They brought small distractions. They did not bring questions. They did not bring accountability. When she mentioned feeling unwell one afternoon, someone waved it off gently. "You're just getting older," they said. "Rest more." And she nodded, because arguing required energy, because explaining required words, and she was learning to live without both. The silence became predictable. Breakfast quiet. Lunch quiet. Dinner quiet. Phone calls missed. Messages unsent. Conversations surface level. No confrontation. No resolution. Just the steady erosion of connection. At night, she replayed the wedding in fragments, not the slap. The faces. The way people looked away. The way the music resumed. The way the room chose comfort over truth. She understood now. What happened at the wedding wasn't a moment. It was a pattern. Silence had been practiced there, perfected, and now it was being repeated day after day by everyone who found it easier to pretend. She grew quieter, not because she had nothing to say, but because she had learned that speaking changed nothing. When she did see her son again briefly, months later, the visit was polite, careful, like two people walking around something broken on the floor, pretending it wasn't sharp. They talked about safe things. Work, weather. The price of food. He did not apologize. She did not ask him to. They smiled when required. And when he left, the house felt exactly the same as it had before he arrived. Empty, but orderly. That was when she understood fully. The slap had been a single act, a moment, a flash. But silence had settled in. Silence had routines. Silence had rules. Silence showed up every day, on time, without fail. The slap happened once. The silence happened every day. The mother withdrew, not in a dramatic way. Not with slammed doors or angry speeches. She simply started disappearing while still being in the room. At first, it looked like fatigue. The kind of tiredness people expect from an older Nigerian woman who has carried too much for too long. She began to sit more, to move slower, to speak less. When relatives visited, she smiled quickly and politely, then drifted toward the kitchen as if she had forgotten something on the stove. She hadn't. She just needed somewhere to stand where no one would look directly at her. In Nigeria, people notice loud pain. They know what to do with tears and shouting. They gather, they pray, they advise, they argue. But quiet pain is harder. Quiet pain makes people feel responsible. And when people feel responsible, they often choose distance. So they let her be quiet. They called it peace. She stopped attending gatherings she used to show up for without being asked. At first, she sent excuses. Her leg was aching. The sun was too strong. She had chores. She wasn't feeling well. After a while, she stopped sending excuses. Her world shrank. Her phone stayed on the table, face down. Not because she was trying to punish anyone, but because she had learned the cruelty of expectation. Waiting for a call that did not come was a daily humiliation she no longer wanted. Sometimes her son's name appeared in her mind like an ache. She would start to dial, then stop. Her finger would hover, then lower. She would set the phone down and stare at her hands, as if the decision not to reach out was something she could see there, written into her skin. She wasn't angry. Anger still requires hope. What she was learning was something colder. How to stop hoping. In the city, her son told himself she was simply adjusting. That she was fine. That older people liked quiet. That she was probably proud of him, watching his pictures online, smiling to herself. He didn't ask. Because asking would risk hearing something he didn't want to carry. His wife noticed once that his mother no longer called. She mentioned it gently, like a suggestion, like a soft knock on a door. "She hasn't checked on us in a while," she said. He shrugged. That's how she is. That's how he needed her to be. A mother who could take anything. A mother who didn't demand. A mother who stayed in her place. Because if she became a person with needs, then he would have to become a son with responsibilities, and that felt heavier than silence. Back in the old house, her body began to respond to what her mouth refused to say. She stopped eating properly. Food sat untouched longer than it should. She would cook something small, take 2 bites, then wrap the rest away as if saving it for later. Later became the next day. The next day became another week. Her sleep grew thin. She would wake before dawn, sit upright, and listen to the quiet like it was a visitor in her home. Sometimes she turned on the radio just to hear voices, any voices moving through the air. Her neighbors started to notice. Not dramatically. Nigerians do not usually announce what they see directly. They notice in side comments and questions disguised as jokes. "Mama, you're getting slimmer, oh. Mama, are you sure you are eating well?" She laughed when they said it. A small laugh, a polite laugh. The kind that ends a conversation before it goes somewhere dangerous. "I'm fine," she told them. Fine meant, "I don't want to explain." Her family's visits became less frequent. When they did come, they kept it simple. They brought groceries. They prayed briefly. They talked about safe topics. Work, prices, politics, weather. No one brought up the wedding. No one brought up the slap. No one brought up the fact that her own son had turned into a stranger she was not allowed to mention. Because some truths are so sharp that people would rather pretend they don't exist than admit they've been holding them this whole time. She began to keep the house darker. Curtains stayed drawn longer during the day. Lights stayed off until night. It wasn't depression in the way people dramatize it. It was withdrawal. A slow retreat into smaller spaces where disappointment couldn't find her as easily. She stopped wearing her better wrappers, stopped tying her gel for church. Her Sundays changed from community and singing to quiet and stillness. Sometimes she attended service, but she sat at the back, where she could leave quickly if she felt her throat tightening. Even prayers felt different now. Before, her prayers had been full of requests. Now they were mostly silence. Her health started slipping in ways that looked ordinary from the outside. A cough that lingered. A weakness that came suddenly when she stood too long. A pain in her chest that appeared at night, then vanished by morning. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself not to be dramatic. She didn't go to the clinic right away. Nigerian mothers rarely do. They treat sickness like they treat sadness, something to manage quietly. But one afternoon, she collapsed in the yard. Not in a cinematic way. Just a sudden loss of strength, knees folding as if her body had finally admitted what her spirit had been carrying. A neighbor found her and called for help. People gathered. Someone brought water. Someone fanned her face with a piece of cardboard. Someone prayed loudly, because prayer is what people do when they don't know how to fix something. She came back to herself slowly, blinking at the circle of faces above her. And the first thing she asked softly, almost embarrassed, was not for medicine. It was, "Please, don't call him." They stared confused. "Your son?" Someone asked. She nodded once. It wasn't pride. It wasn't stubbornness. It was something worse. It was the certainty that calling him would not change the truth, that he would either not come, or come too late, or come only long enough to feel like a good son again. And she could not bear that kind of performance in her weakest moment, so they didn't call him. They took her inside. They helped her lie down. They whispered among themselves that she needed rest, that she was getting old, that life was hard, that God would strengthen her. They treated her collapse like a weather event. Unfortunate, sudden, unpredictable, not the result of anything anyone had done, not the result of anything anyone had refused to do. Her son did not hear about it immediately. When he finally did, through a cousin who mentioned it casually, like gossip, his reaction was brief. A tightness in his chest. A flash of guilt. A quick mental calculation of his schedule. He texted, "How are you?" Hours later she replied, "I'm fine." 2 words, nothing else. She did not mention the collapse. She did not mention the pain. She did not mention the loneliness. She was still protecting him. Even now, he stared at the message and felt relief. Fine meant he could continue. Fine meant he didn't have to go back. Fine meant the silence could remain untouched, so he let it. And life continued, as it always does, on top of things that should have been addressed. The mother grew quieter still. Her absence became a familiar fact, like a chair that stays empty until you stop noticing it was ever meant to be filled. Family events went on without her. Decisions were made without her. Stories were told without her. She became someone people referenced in passing. Mama is resting. Mama isn't feeling strong. Mama doesn't like stress. They said it the way people talk about weather, as if it had nothing to do with them. Months passed, then more. And something else happened, something subtle, but devastating. People stopped expecting her to be there. They stopped saving her a seat, stopped asking why she wasn't coming. They didn't exclude her with cruelty. They excluded her with habit. That is how a person disappears in a family. Not with a fight. With silence repeated often enough that everyone learns to live around the empty space it creates. The mother did not die. But she vanished anyway, into routines that included no one, into days that required no conversation, into a life so small that pain had no audience. And somewhere deep inside the family, the truth stayed buried, that none of this needed another slap. None of it needed another public humiliation. Because the first moment had already taught everyone what to do. Look away, continue, pretend. No one pushed her again. They didn't need to. When everyone finally realized something was wrong, it didn't arrive like a sudden truth. It arrived quietly, late, almost politely. It began with small absences that were no longer easy to explain. The mother stopped answering the door, stopped picking up the phone, stopped being mentioned without someone feeling the need to lower their voice afterward. At first, people told themselves it was nothing. She's resting. She doesn't like stress. She prefers her quiet now. Those explanations worked for a while. They always do. Because explanations exist to protect the people using them, not person being explained away. Then one day, a relative went to her house and found the gate unlocked. The compound was silent, too silent. Inside, the rooms were exactly as she had left them, clean, orderly, controlled. The way a woman keeps a space when she doesn't want to inconvenience anyone, even in absence. Her slippers sat near the door, unused. The chair she favored by the window was empty, dust collecting on its arms like time had finally decided to leave a mark. She wasn't gone in the way people dramatize. She hadn't vanished. She had simply retreated so completely that no one had noticed when she crossed the line between presence and absence. News traveled quickly then, too quickly. Phone calls were made. Messages sent. Concern suddenly found its voice. People asked questions they should have asked months earlier. When did anyone last check on her? Has anyone spoken to her recently? Why didn't we notice? Each question landed heavy, then bounced away, unanswered, because answers would require responsibility. And responsibility was the one thing everyone had been avoiding from the beginning. Her son heard about it late in the day. Not from urgency, from routine. A cousin called. His tone was careful, measured. "Mama hasn't been well," he said. "We think you should come." That sentence, "you should come," carried more weight than any accusation. The son felt something tighten in his chest. A pressure he couldn't name, not grief, not yet. Something closer to fear. He asked questions that sounded practical. Where was she now? Who was with her? What exactly happened? The answers were vague. No one knew for sure. Because no one had stayed long enough to find out. When he arrived days later, the house felt unfamiliar, despite being the place that had made him. The air was heavy, still, unforgiving. Relatives moved around quietly, speaking in hushed tones, avoiding his eyes, not out of anger, out of discomfort. They didn't know whether to console him or resent him. So they did neither. He walked through the room slowly, touching things without realizing he was touching them. A scarf folded neatly. A cup left by the sink. A Bible on the table, marked at a page he couldn't remember her reading. This was not the chaos of loss. This was the orderliness of someone who had been preparing to disappear without burdening anyone. That realization hurt more than anything else. He sat in the chair by the window, the same one she used. And for the first time since the wedding, he allowed himself to imagine what silence had cost her, not the slap. The days after, the weeks, the unanswered calls, the conversations that went on without her, the decisions made as if she no longer existed. No one had chased her away. They didn't need to. Everyone had simply agreed, without saying it, that she would fade on her own, and she did. There was no trial, no confrontation, no moment where someone stood up and said, "This was wrong." There was no punishment. No one lost their reputation. No one was publicly shamed. No one paid a price that could be measured or counted. But something was gone. And it wasn't just her presence. It was the sense of safety people had once felt in each other, the belief that family meant intervention, the idea that silence could be harmless. At the next gathering, her absence was undeniable. The seat she once occupied remained empty, not intentionally, but because no one knew who should sit there now. Conversations slowed around it, stumbled, then picked up again elsewhere. People spoke more softly, laughed less freely. Guilt has a way of rearranging rooms. The son tried to speak at one point. He opened his mouth, searching for something that could repair what had been neglected for too long. An apology, an explanation, a confession. Nothing came out. Because words spoken this late don't heal. They only expose. He realized then that no sentence he formed would undo the years of silence. No gesture would reach back far enough to change the choices already made. He had waited for a moment that never came, a moment where someone else would speak first, a moment where responsibility would shift away from him. That moment never existed, and now, neither did the chance to fix it. The family carried on. They always do. Life continued around the absence, adapting the way people adapt to missing stairs, carefully, consciously, always aware of what isn't there. They didn't call it loss. They didn't call it abandonment. They called it unfortunate. A word that removes agency. A word that lets everyone breathe easier. But deep down, they all knew. Violence leaves bruises. Bruises heal. Silence leaves emptiness, and emptiness lasts longer. It stretches, it echoes. It changes the shape of everything around it. Sometimes, the worst person in the room is not the one who acts. It's the one who watches,